increase the brutality of its campaign against Ukraine. We've seen videos of Russian forces moving exceptionally lethal weaponry into Ukraine, which has no place on the battlefield. That includes cluster munitions and vacuum bombs, which are banned under the Geneva Convention. We all have seen the 40-mile-long lethal convoy charging toward Kyiv. President Putin continues to escalate, putting Russia's nuclear forces on high alert, threatening to invade Finland and Sweden. At every step of the war, Russia has betrayed the United Nations. Russia's actions go against everything this body stands for. People across the world have already united together in exactly the way this General Assembly must do today. Protests and vigils against Russia's war and in solidarity with Ukraine, marked with blue and yellow, have sprung up across the globe. These are protests for peace, from Bangkok to Budapest, from Berlin to Buenos Aires, from Sydney to Seoul, from Calgary to Cape Town, and even in Moscow and Minsk. People everywhere are standing up to call for President Putin to stop this attack. The Russian people are themselves asking how many lives Putin will sacrifice for his cynical ambitions. And they are appalled at the answer. To the Russian protesters, I say thank you. Thank you for your bravery. To the Russian soldiers sent to the front lines of an unjust, unnecessary war, I say your leaders are lying to you. Do not commit war crimes. Do everything you can to put down your weapons and leave Ukraine. The truth is that this war was one man's choice and one man alone, President Putin. It was his choice to force hundreds of thousands of people to stuff their lives into backpacks and flee the country, to send newborn babies into makeshift bomb shelters, to make children with cancer huddle in hospital basements, interrupting their treatment, essentially sentencing them to death. Those were President Putin's choices. Now it's time for us to make ours. The United States is choosing to stand with the Ukrainian people. We are choosing, in coordination with our allies and partners, to impose severe consequences on Russia. We are choosing to hold Russia accountable for its actions, and we will soon turn to vote on a resolution that does just that. We believe this is a simple vote. Vote yes if you believe UN member states, including your own, have a right to sovereignty and territorial integrity. Vote yes if you believe Russia should be held to account for its actions. Vote yes if you believe in upholding the UN Charter and everything this institution stands for. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Observer State of the Holy See.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, thank you for calling this emergency special session, as in recent days we have been shaken by something tragic, war. The Holy See joins the many member states and millions across the globe who call for the immediate cessation of hostilities in Ukraine and the return to diplomacy and dialogue. Mr. President, The organization is founded to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. It is the duty of all states to seek to resolve disputes through negotiation, mediation, or by other peaceful means, even when war has commenced. Mr. President, last Sunday, Pope Francis expressed his closeness with all who now suffer as a result of the conflict, stressing that, and I quote, "It is urgent to open humanitarian corridors, and those fleeing must be welcomed." With heart broken by what is happening in Ukraine, and let us not forget the wars in other parts of the world, I repeat, put down your weapons. Those who love peace reject war as an instrument of aggression against the freedom of other peoples and as a means for the settlement of international disputes. End of quote. The Holy See wishes to express, also in this forum, its appreciation to those states which are offering humanitarian assistance to those in need, both in Ukraine and in neighboring countries, in which many Ukrainians have sought safety. Mr. President, Pope Francis has called on believers and non-believers alike to observe this Wednesday, 2nd of March, as a day to be close to the suffering of the Ukrainian people, to feel that we are all brothers and sisters, and to implore of God the end of this war. The Holy See is convinced that there is always time for goodwill. There is still room for negotiations. There is still a place for the exercise of a wisdom that can prevent the predominance of partisan interest, safeguard the legitimate aspiration of everyone, and spare the world from the folly and horrors of war. May this emergency special session advance efforts that help attain this end. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Holy See. I now give the floor to the observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished representatives, the Sovereign Order of Malta, a sovereign entity which provides global humanitarian aid with a special mission to serving the sick and the poor, has observed with great sadness and regret the ongoing conflict which has impacted the lives of so many citizens of Ukraine and which is currently created an unprecedented flow of refugees seeking peace and security across their nation's borders. In 8 years of conflict, the Order's embassy to Ukraine has provided considerable support, advice, and material help to Ukrainian citizens and to non-Ukrainian residents of the country who are in need. The current crisis is seeing multiple cities and towns attacked and bombed, forcing families to leave their homes and seeking shelter elsewhere. Our representatives and ambassadors in the region report that while refugees have sufficient means to travel and find refuge on their own, or enjoy dual citizenship with nearby nations, the majority do not have the resources to provide for themselves without support. UN agencies predict that a potential refugee exodus of over 6 million persons might well be the outcome of this situation. In the meanwhile, many elderly people and those who are sick or disabled in some way are unable to escape the bombing and the stress that accompanies civil unrest. Our concern, obviously, is for them as much as it is for those who have managed to leave. Our staff and volunteers in major population centers within Ukraine continue to provide assistance as much as is feasible, given the ongoing security and safety problems. This past weekend, we held a summit of our regional ambassadors and aid providers under the auspices of our international relief agency, Malteser International. At that time, we were able to review both the growing extent of the refugee crisis as well as the initiatives we are taking to support the growing swell of primarily mothers and children and a small number of senior citizens. As of this morning, it is estimated that almost 700,000 individuals have made the journey across the borders of Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, and Moldavia. And each day that the conflict continues, the flow of anguished families will grow. We have seen some nations go out of their way to welcome these individuals and to help them through the trauma. Our Order of Malta staff along the border with Ukraine totals over 5,000 personnel, with tens of thousands of volunteers doing everything from serving hot food and drink, caring for the victims of injury and accident, providing counseling and emotional support, and assisting in securing of short-term accommodation. Volunteers from locations away from the border, many of them from other countries, representing churches and community groups, have driven their cars and vans to provide transportation to new arrivals to ensure that they are given every opportunity to find a place to stay. We are coordinating our activities with international aid agencies, such as the Red Cross and the UNHCR, and are engaged in an international fundraising program to ensure that adequate resources continue to be available for the support and maintenance of those in need. We are encouraged that the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva will be holding a debate on human rights in Ukraine today. Representatives from our government will be participating in this important discussion. We appeal to nations of goodwill to appreciate the trauma experienced by all refugees. In particular, we appeal to countries who are receiving refugees to extend the same welcome they're offering Ukrainians to those of other national and ethnic groups who have been caught in this conflict and who are seeking security. The offer of help and support must cross ethnic, racial, and cultural lines and not be tainted by discriminatory acts or attitudes. This conflict in Europe drives home the realization that the issues of internally displaced persons and the needs of refugees forced from their homes affects the whole world: Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, and now Europe. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta for the statement. I now give the floor to the observer of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, International IDEA strongly condemns the unprovoked war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation with the involvement of Belarus against Ukraine, a sovereign nation and a democracy. This is in breach of international law and international agreements and a rules-based international order that underpins the shared objective of global peace and the existence of organizations such as International IDEA. The invasion order by the President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin, is a blatant violation of the UN Charter. As firm believers in the rights of peoples to exercise their fundamental rights and freedoms, we convey our full support to and solidarity with the people of Ukraine. They are innocent victims of this aggression. We salute the brave partners and democracy activists with whom International IDEA has engaged in recent years when Ukraine made huge progress towards being a stable and thriving democracy. We call on the international community to spring into action to protect them and mitigate the humanitarian consequences of the invasion. We cannot fail to note that the military operation was launched while the UN Security Council was meeting to discuss the crisis. We reiterate our firm belief that international crises should be addressed through the means of multilateral diplomacy and resolved on the basis of the principles of the Charter. It is particularly unfortunate that this naked rejection of these principles happens during a pandemic that has rendered evident the need for increased global cooperation to make the world governable and to achieve justice for all. In these days, we are witnessing what an unchecked ruler, for decades trampling fundamental rights and freedoms of his own citizens, can do to undermine peace and democracy beyond his own borders. Ukraine is a country that has successfully reached democratic standards over the past 2 decades, from respecting media freedoms to free and fair elections, local democracy, and the fights against corruption. It is no wonder President Putin is scared of such democratic vibrancy at his doorstep. This is a pivotal moment for Democrats all over the world to stand united in support of Ukraine. It is also the moment to reinforce action to counter and to prevent the rise of authoritarian regimes elsewhere, which cannot survive without kleptocracy and the systematic violation of human rights and freedoms. We call on Russia to immediately withdraw its military forces and fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Revanchist interpretations of history and attempts to change borders based on ethno-nationalist fantasies offer not a luminous path for humanity, but a route towards darkness and endless cycles of violence. They certainly don't provide any hope to the younger and unborn generations that will bear the brunt of the climate crisis, or to the billions of vulnerable people around the world that are yet to realize the promise of a life free from fear and want, and the promise of the Agenda 2030. Those are the real challenges of our age. We encourage the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to make use of his good offices to advance ceasefire talks, humanitarian access to the war-affected areas, and protection of civilians, and particularly the most vulnerable ones. We urge UN member states to adopt and enforce sanctions against the Russian Federation until withdrawal of their forces from Ukraine and the full restoration of its territorial integrity. We urge UN member states to do whatever it takes in compliance with the principles of the UN Charter to stop this war and prevent any further escalation of conflict. International IDEA will do its part in collaboration with the United Nations, our member states, and other democratic governments and organizations to protect in Ukraine and elsewhere the principle that every country has a right to freely determine its own fate on the basis of the will of the people, freely expressed. Democracy's institutions and processes are the best means to protect their right. Today, we must stand up for these principles. Today, we must stand up for Ukraine, which embodies these principles and defends them to our greatest respect. Diakuyu, thank you.
I thank the distinguished observer of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item. The General Assembly has thus concluded this stage of the consideration of Agenda Item 5. The Assembly will resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5 entitled Letter dated 28 February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council S/2014/136 to take action on a draft resolution issued as document A/ES-11/L1. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine to introduce draft resolution A/ES-11/L1.
Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished delegates. We are living through a defining moment for our generation. Our generation is the generation that was supposed by our predecessors to be saved from scourge of war. That is why our predecessors created the United Nations. And yet today, it falls to us to save future generations. Let me read the following text. Our position is that whatever grievances a nation may have, however objectionable it finds the status quo, aggressive warfare is an illegal means for those grievances or for altering those conditions. It may be that the nation faced desperate problems that would have warranted the boldest measures short of war. All other methods, persuasion, propaganda, economic competition, diplomacy, were open to an aggrieved country. But aggressive warfare was outlawed. The defendants did make aggressive war a war in violation of treaties. They did attack and invade their neighbors in order to effectuate a foreign policy which they knew could not be accomplished by measures short of war. And that is as far as we accuse or propose to inquire. End of quote. Said in his opening statement to the International Military Tribunal on November 21, 1945, in the Palace of Justice at Nuremberg, Justice Robert Jackson, Chief of Counsel. And these words are addressed today to Mr. Putin, Mr. Shoigu, Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Volodin, Ms. Matvienko, and perhaps dozens more, but certainly they are not addressed to the Russian citizens, those Russian citizens who try to preserve their dignity. For almost a week, Ukraine is fighting under the bombs and missiles, fighting in the face of armadas of hardware and countless crowds of enemies. They have come to the Ukrainian soil not only to kill some of us, not only to shift our course and priorities. They have come to deprive Ukraine of the very right to exist. They have come to resolve the Ukrainian issue, as their propagandists claimed. Just stop and think whether these words remind you of something. Yes, more than 80 years ago, another dictator tried to finally resolve the issue of another people. He failed. When the world responded in a resolute and united manner, it was happened immediately, and the delay costed dozens of millions of people. Are we ready to pay such a price now? Or is it time to demonstrate the unity of purpose and deeds already now? We appreciate all manifestations of such unity and solidarity with Ukraine. I would like to express gratitude to all member states that support Ukrainians in their battle for freedom. I would also like to thank those member states that accepted Ukrainian refugees, mostly women and children. More than 500,000 have already fled from Russian missiles and shells. I will not recite all facts of new war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Russian troops have committed since my previous statement 2 days ago. The list is so long that it will run out of time. The crimes are so barbaric that it is difficult to comprehend. Facing the total resistance of the Ukrainian population, Putin's regime has proceeded to widespread use of indiscriminate weapons such as multiple rocket launchers and aerial bombs against the residential areas. Ukrainians are being killed by Russian ballistic missiles and thermobaric weapons. Just yesterday, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zhytomyr, Mariupol, Melitopol, and many other cities and towns sustained heavy shellings that killed dozens of innocents, including children. Ukraine deeply regrets that a student from India has become a victim of this shelling by the Russian armed forces in Kharkiv. We offer our deepest sympathies to India and the relatives of the victim. A Chinese citizen was also injured in another Ukrainian city because of Russia's deadly attacks. The Ukrainian and foreign citizens have become hostages of the Russian armed aggression against Ukraine. In Kyiv, Russian murderers hit the city TV tower, killing 5 passerbys. One of the missiles dropped on the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial, a sacred place of commemoration of Jews, Ukrainians, Roma, and representatives of other ethnic groups killed by Nazis during the World War II. What an irony when victims of Nazis are being killed for the second time by Nazi modern followers. As the President of Ukraine asked, what was the point of repeating the slogan, "Never again," in 80 years? It's already clear that the goal of Russia is not an occupation only. It is genocide. On 7th and 8th of March 2022, the International Court of Justice will hold public hearings in the case concerning allegations of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Ukraine versus Russian Federation. Also, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has decided to proceed with opening of a formal investigation into the situation in Ukraine. Unprovoked escalation of Russian aggression against Ukraine gives reasons to believe that crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC continue to be committed on the territory of Ukraine. Along with the situation in Crimea and Donbass, recent events suggest that aggressors' troops continue to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. Dear colleagues, one might consider observing the bloodshed in Ukraine that it is not my war. It is a mistake. The evil will never stop. It requires more and more space to conquer. If tolerated, it advances further and further. The draft resolution is one of the building blocks to build a wall to stop it, to stop in Ukraine and not to let it go further. The wall that will protect all of you, in particular younger generations. Distinguished delegates, by voting today, you also reconfirm your country's commitment to the UN Charter. After the vote, I invite you, ambassadors and representatives, to stop by the Indonesian lounge and to sign this little blue book. Little but of global magnitude. Every vote in favor of the resolution and every signature of country that voted in favor would be a historical reconfirmation of the Charter. It is very easy, ladies and gentlemen, to sign the Charter at time of peace. It is a duty to sign and reconfirm and implement the Charter at the time of war. So stop by the Indonesian lounge, put the name of your country if you voted in favor, and after you sign this book, I will hand it over to the Secretary General for keeping the book in his office, in front of him. So at every single moment, the Secretary General will get an inspiration from the overwhelming majority of nations who still trust in the UN, who still trust in the UN Charter. There is a very fragile gentleman, a very old one. He was born in a territory that was part of the Kingdom of Hungary. He will celebrate his 102 years birthday in 9 days. His name is Benjamin Ferenc. Benjamin Ferenc was an investigator of war crimes, a chief prosecutor at one of the 12 subsequent trials of Nuremberg. Later, he became an advocate of international rule of law and for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. With the permission of the producer, I would play a couple of seconds of his words. And I want you to listen very carefully.
It's hard to do. 3 words, law, not war. If you can do that, you save every day billions of dollars, which you can use to deal with the legitimate complaints of old people who need medical care, students who have to pay for their tuition, all the legitimate complaints which could be solved if we didn't spend the money on weapons to kill them instead of helping them. And that is the current system. Now, how are you going to do it? I will end by telling you how to do it and the principles which have guided me. There are three principles. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3, I hear you, never give up. Good luck. I wish you the best of luck.
Please show respect. Show respect to the Charter. Show respect to the Secretary General. Show respect to this gentleman who will celebrate 102 years since his birthday. I call upon all responsible member states to support the draft. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. We shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. Before I open the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
President, Secretary General, colleagues, Russia would ask for this draft resolution to be put to the vote. And we call on you not to support this draft. However, we know about the unprecedented pressure that our Western partners are exerting on a large number of countries, urging them to vote as they see fit. This is not something even that we can call pressure. It was open and cynical threats, and we know about it. This document will not allow us to end military activities. On the contrary, it could embolden and Kiev radicals and nationalists to continue to determine the policy of their country at any price, holding peaceful civilians hostage, but not in the figure